Rhetoric is the art of public speaking. And for Christians, one of the main things that we are trying to do is actually spread the word of God. And that includes not only speaking in public forums, but also speaking in private forums, actually just dialoguing with someone. And so it always helps to bone up your capacities of being able to deliver your faith in a way that's recognizable, understandable, and sympathetic to other people's worldviews. So as we're going through these rhetoric studies, it is something that was actually included in all schools up until about 100 years ago. So every school used to teach this as a class, and then they just stopped doing it because I guess they figured that we didn't need to know how to talk anymore. I don't know why they stopped doing that. But me and Sean are here for you. We're here to give you the education that you were denied and to help you understand just the basic rules of what rhetoric is all about, to help you implement these strategies, not only when you share your faith, but also, hopefully, in your dialogue with the people that you love, right? Because as we've been going through not only the do's of rhetoric, what you should be doing, we also have been going through a lot of the don'ts lately, the what we call logical fallacies, ways to argue your point that are not only dishonest, but ways that derail the conversation and don't lead to truth, but only lead to disharmony. And hey, you may win an argument utilizing these tactics, but you're definitely not going to prove anything truthful. So we want to be able to avoid these kind of missteps when we're talking to people, and we want to be able to, again, portray our views in the most honest and the most ways that hold the most integrity, ways that will actually convince people of truth as opposed to just convincing people that we're right. And those are two different things. So we've been going through a lot of different ones. Today we're going through a real interesting one. I know it's been one on your docket for a while. Why don't you tell us about it, Sean?
Yeah, the act of attributing motive, or as people on the internet call it, conversation, is essentially making the mistake that you know the person's heart and intentions when speaking to them, and you hand it to them. Now, this is usually done in a way that's meant to expose underhanded motivations. You're just saying this because you want to do this. And it's a fallacy because it presumes something that isn't necessarily the case. And that not necessarily is the foundation of everything wrong with this speaking fallacy. So when we're talking to people and we seem to understand where they're coming from, we can't go so far as to say this is why you're doing what you're doing. Even if you have a comprehensive understanding of their background, even if they've perhaps told you, you don't know if it's necessarily maybe a humorous manner or it's in a dismissive manner. You don't know their heart. And this is a biblically based principle as well. God, in his revelation of himself, clarifies that in all of human history, there is one and only one that has known the thoughts and intents of man's heart, and that's him and him alone. For us to claim that would be for us to claim to be God, something that Jesus does in John chapter 1, where it notes Jesus did not commit himself to them because he knew what was in them. That's a reference back to Jeremiah chapter 17 and verse 11, your favorite book of the Bible, probably one of the more relevant passages, that says that I, the Lord, search the heart. I know the intents of the mind, to give to each man according to his works. So when we're talking to people, to presume that we understand, or at least know them well enough, to say this is what you meant, or to say this is why you're doing what you're doing, the fallacy stands or falls on these two simple words, not necessarily. Now, how do we keep ourselves from falling into this? Odds are it's more a emotional snowball effect of the tone of the conversation and trying to get someone back on track, but in the wrong way. If I'm talking to an atheist and I say, well, you're just saying this because you hate Christians, or vice versa, you're just saying this because you hate atheists, it's all on the basis of a misappropriation, basically, of someone's ability to know what the other person means and, of course, what they are doing. And here's the big issue, why? How do we avoid that mistake?
Yeah, no. Very good question. I'm going to read a passage where we see the first usage of this logical fallacy, and it is by none other than Satan himself. So that should tell us that probably one that we should avoid, but it also should tell us how ubiquitous this fallacy is, meaning that it really does pervade all of humanity. It is one that is very difficult to avoid, one that I make all the time, and I need to be very careful about it. and one that is, again, very difficult to come back from. So this is Satan utilizing this fallacy in the Garden of Eden. This is Genesis chapter 3. And when he's tempting Eve, he says this. Essentially, Eve tells him, like, hey, if we eat of this, we're going to die. Then the serpent said to the woman, this is verse 4, by the way, the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die, for God knows that in the day that you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Notice what he's doing. So he's attributing motive to God. God is telling them not to do something. Now, what's God's actual motive for telling us not to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil? Well, God wants to preserve the innocence of mankind that is preserved based on our faithfulness towards him. Adam and Eve in the garden believed what God had said is good and evil. We attributed everything that is based on God's nature to be good and anything that departs from it to be evil, even though we didn't have any knowledge of what would depart from God's nature because there was nothing that departed from God's nature within the garden. So that reliance and that faithfulness is what built the relationship of man and God. What Satan is now doing is he's saying, no. The real reason why God put this tree in the middle of the garden is because he knows that it will actually make you like him, that you're going to be able to discern for yourselves what is right and what is wrong. And how do you really know that God got it right? Maybe there are means of goodness and means of evil that God is forbidding from you that are actually good. And maybe it's your right. It's your liberty to be able to take this fruit and figure it out for yourself. That was the temptation. And so he's attributing I guess you call it a deceptive motive to God. He's saying that God is deceiving you, he's manipulating you, that's why he's doing it. And that lie actually is something that Adam and Eve start to believe, right? They start to accept it as being true, and that is why not only do they eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but the second that God comes back into the garden, what do? They hide, right? And they hide from him because they see him as now a evil or malevolent force that is within the Garden of Eden. So very important to see that this is something that is literally on the second page of the Bible, something that goes throughout all of human history, and something, like I said, that I see all the time in my counselings. I would say it might be the number one issue I see within marital counseling. So people assuming that they know why their spouse is doing a particular thing or not doing a particular thing. It's why a lot of people actually avoid conversations. They justify themselves to me. They say, well, I would talk to them about it, but they're not going to listen. So you just know that they're not going to listen? Well, this is definitely done. This was definitely done to hurt me, right? They're definitely out to get me. Why would I talk to them if I know that they're out to get me? Would you talk to someone if you knew they were just going to yell at you or abuse you again? Well,
if they were.
Yeah, if I knew, right? Inside of my marriage, like I said, I struggle with this a lot. Whenever me and my wife get into a fight, 9 times out of 10 is because I'm attributing a motive to her that's not actually there, right? I pick up on something that she did or something that she said or a tone or something like that, and I assume, oh man, she was just, look at that look that she just gave me, or look at the tone of her voice, and I start to assume things about her, and then we get into an argument. So the first step in avoiding this fallacy, from you making this fallacy, is just as Sean said, you don't know. You don't know. Unless it's explicitly told to you, you just don't know. In 1 Corinthians 13, we have a depiction of love, and it says, love hopes all things, right? What this means is that love is optimistic, even naively optimistic at times, right? When you look at the way that God treats people in the Old Testament, you're like, God, you seem a little naive here, man. Like you are giving people a lot of rope knowing that they're going to hang themselves with it. Well, God's not naive. God is hopeful. He gives people the benefit of the doubt, because this is very important. If you want people to act in a particular way, treat them as if they are acting in that way. If you want people to act to the lowest parts of their humanity, treat them as if they have something to hide, something that they have to be ashamed of, right? So it is a kind of a paradox a little bit, but within marital counseling, what I tell people is, if you treat your spouse as if they are a loving, respectable spouse, they'll start acting more that way. If you treat your spouse as if they are a vindictive, bitter, disrespectful, unloving kind of a person, they're going to start behaving in that way towards you. Treat people as you would like them to be, and they might start acting that way. Doesn't mean they will start acting that way, but it gives them a lot more room to maneuver within their character. Treat people as if they are evil, and they will start acting that way. They will live down to the identity that you ascribe to them through your behavior. So be very, very careful. You don't know why people are doing things the way that they are. It's okay in certain circumstances to ask, but only if you have a lot of evidence and you don't do it in a leading way, right? So when I say a leading question, don't say, you were just doing that to hurt me, weren't you? Right? That's not a question. You already know the answer to that question. You are assuming you are definitely presuming in that tone. But if you say, hey, you know what? I'm not really sure why you did this or why you did that. I perceived it this way, but I could totally be wrong, right? I could totally be wrong. Please let me know if I'm wrong. I want to believe I'm wrong, but was this done to hurt me? Was this done as an offensive thing? Just let me know, please, right? The more you're able to do that with an assertive tone of voice, meaning you're not doing it out of fear, you're not doing it out of anxiety, but you're able to just assert that and say, this is what I think. I could be completely wrong and I want to be wrong. Please let me know what's going on inside of your head. And I'll just believe whatever you say, right? If you tell me that you didn't mean anything by it, I'll believe that, because you know what? Again, some people are like, well, I know that I don't care what they say. I know that they did this to hurt me. I know that they did this to... Okay, well, you're not really going to get very far in life if you just attribute motive to everybody. You're not going to be able to have any type of loving relationship if that's the way you're going to behave. You got to function off of hope. You got to function off of some amount of optimism in your relationships, or you're just going to be so embittered at humanity that you're going to end up alone. So if that's what you want, I guess go for it. But if you want to have loving and caring relationships, you're going to have to be able to give people the benefit of the doubt here and there. Now, there's one caveat I'll add to this. This almost never happens. And I almost hate giving caveats because I know that when I do this, people are going to use this as an excuse to feed their flesh. Challenge yourself with what I'm about to say. There is one group of people out there that you have to be very cautious of, and that would be intentionally manipulative, narcissistic, gaslighting individuals, right? So people who will slight you and then lie about it to your face, right? Those people do exist. They're out there.
They have a website. It's called Twitter.
And actually, we're seeing a lot of it in politics right now. People just openly gaslighting in front of the news and the media, on both sides, by the way. Mm-hmm. It's really atrocious, but it's there. So there are this small, but believe me, it's a small percentage of people. It seems like it's a large percentage of people because, like you said, Sean, it's all over Twitter. But these are just the people that are acting in their worst humanity when you're on social media. The majority of people don't do this with regular, focused animosity like real gaslighters do. Most people do this unintentionally, or they do it on a whim if they are going to do it. But a lot of people don't do it at all, right? When they are wrong or they've done something, they might ignore the question, they might diffuse the question, but they won't lie to your face unless you're dealing with someone that has some serious problems. So test yourself, right? Don't just assume, well, no, I'm dealing with the 2% you were talking about. I am dealing with a narcissist. Maybe you're not, right? Be sure that you're investigating this. Give people the benefit of the doubt as much as you can. But once you've come to the conclusion, once you get to the place where you're like, no, I've talked to other people about this. Other people have witnessed it. It's not just me. This person does this particular thing. Then you could start working through it. If you guys have a question about how to deal with people who gaslight or narcissists, ask us in the comments. I'd be happy to talk about it a little bit. But for the most part, try not to do that. Now, if somebody does it to you, right? Someone attributes motive to you, the best way to diffuse that situation is to ask a follow-up question. So this is what God does. Right? So again, who better to learn from than God, right? So God goes into the garden and, he could have easily just been like, Adam, I know what you did. I'm kind of God. I saw what you did. I know why you're hiding. Let's have a talk, bro. But he doesn't. He comes in the garden and he says, where are you? Adam says, I heard your voice in the garden. I was afraid because I was naked and hid myself. So notice he's still attributing kind of that motive to God. You are someone to be feared. You are someone to be afraid of. Not, I've done something wrong and you're just to be upset with me. It's, you're a terrifying person and I'm hiding from you, right? This kind of thing. By the way, we call this cry bully tactics in modern day vernacular. I didn't want to talk to you because you're just so mean. Like you yelled at me before. Okay, fine. So how does God deal with this? So Adam's kind of passively attributing motive to God. How does he handle this? He said, who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten of the tree which I commanded you that you should not eat? So he asks him a question that actually infers, why are you attributing this motive to me, Adam? Right? So God is able to see through it, and he's able to say, hey, why are you asking this question? What's really going on, man? Right? So if you're talking to someone and they assume something, well, you're just saying that because you want to take away women's rights. Well, you're just saying that because you're just a big meanie, or you're just saying that because you want to beat up on other people's religions and feel like a big person. Okay, why are you asking me? What have I done that makes you feel that way? Have I been offensive to you? Have I been abusive to you in some way? Like, what have I done that makes you feel in this manner? I actually had a counseling not too long ago, a couple months ago, and they stopped seeing me, and it was because they felt like I was a mean person and I wasn't telling them what they wanted. And I was like, fine, I'm done with you. And I was talking to my friend Lisa Keller, who counsels with me, and she says, you should really close out that counseling. And I said, what do you mean? She's like, in your flesh, you're just going to want to be done with this person because they're being rude to you, they're attributing motive. You just want to be done with them, but don't take that step. Talk to them and say, hey, like, did I do something to offend you? Like, genuinely, and see what they say, because maybe you did something wrong, and maybe you need to repent. And obviously, in my flesh, I didn't want to hear that, but I went to the person, I asked him, hey, honestly, man, like, what did I do that was wrong? Did I do something that was offensive? And they responded to me, well, no, I just felt that way. And I was like, okay, well, like I tried. You just feel that way. There's nothing I could do about that. If you just feel as though I am acting in this way and you don't have any definitive examples of me behaving in a bad way, there's nothing I could do at that point. So
yeah, Proverbs 26 verses 4 through 5 essentially give us the practice round for how to keep this in check. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. But note, the previous verse says, don't answer a fool according to his folly, or you will be like him. So how do we maintain this balancing act? We don't make the mistake of saying, you're a fool, before the conversation's had or has been had before. When we judge based on reputation, we're not doing so in violation, by the way, of Matthew 6, but in fulfillment of it, or Matthew 7, excuse me. When we're talking to people who have a continual pattern of doing something, that doesn't tell us their heart, that tells us whether or not this is a conversation worth having again. And that's the difference. I don't determine someone's a fool based off whether or not I feel they won't listen to me, that I will be a fool in engaging with them. I always give someone the benefit of the doubt and speak to them first. If they say no, or they continue in the pattern that you suspect but aren't attributing yet, then and only then are you putting yourself in the right place to say, this is a conversation I would rather disengage from than to blame someone for something that isn't actually known. So remember, the first and most fundamental fact of attributing motive is you don't know that. I know what they're thinking. No, you don't. This is what they meant. No, it isn't. You can verify that later, but make sure that any determination of someone as a fool comes from experience rather than perception. That's how we avoid this fallacy.
One last thing to put, don't text.
Yeah.
Just stop it. If you're reading a text from somebody and you're like, what did they mean by that?
Conversation
Go
resolution.
talk to them, right? Stop texting at that moment, because whatever is going to come in that conversation after that point, once there's even an intimation that there's bad motive going on within the text conversation or an email conversation or a thread on social media, just stop right there because you're not going to get anywhere good. Say, hey, can we talk about this in person? Can we talk about this face to face? Because again, it's so easy to just read into things when people are texting. Because again, there's no unless people are high in their emojis, like there's no real way of knowing.
Pull an HK-47 and preface every conversation with their emotional state.
Yeah.
We don't do that unless we're being funny.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing is that, you can attribute motive to God, but sometimes that happens not like with ill will. Sometimes we just have an inaccurate view of who God is, maybe based on our own parents or our own father or something like that, where we think God must be thinking a certain way or acting a certain way, but that's not really the truth of his character. Would you agree with that? So just...
No, I would agree with that across the board. I think a lot of times when people get into patterns, like behavioral patterns where they're consistently attributing motive, it's because they've come across a lot of bad behaviors. So if I'm dealing with someone in a counseling and let's say they grew up with abusive parents and now they consistently attribute bad motive to their spouse, that makes sense. It's because they're acting out what they're familiar with, and that could
From
even
experience.
be from experience, and
Right.
that could even be projected upon God. I had a father that treated me in this really bad way. He withheld things from me. He withheld love and affection. So I feel like God is doing the same kind of a thing. Or maybe you had a dad you could never live up to their expectations, and so you feel like you can never live up to God's expectations. That happens a lot. And the way to cleanse yourself of that is with this virtue that we call faith, right? Believing something in spite of what you emotionally are experiencing. So I am emotionally experiencing God is doing this evil and horrible thing, but I'm choosing to believe the opposite, right? And this is what you see in Jeremiah. It's one of my favorite. That's why it's one of my favorite books, is because Jeremiah attributes to motive all over the place, right?
Yeah.
In that book, he does it. He does it
deceived
like
me.
every other chapter, right? He just, God, you're out to get me. He even flat out says, "You deceived me," right? That's what he says to God. So I like his honesty, but over time, you see God being a little bit more harsh with Jeremiah. In the beginning of the book, he's like, "Hey, man, I get it. I know why you're a little freaked out by me, considering the fact that your own family tried to kill you. But I'm not.
I
one of
told
these
you
people."
this in chapter 1.
He's like, "I'm not trying to get you, man. It's okay." Right? He's very gentle. Towards the end, he goes, "You got to stop, man.
Yeah.
I haven't done anything against you. You need to stop attributing this kind of." And Jeremiah gets the picture at the end, which is really, really beautiful. So absolutely, past events can make people more susceptible to this fallacy. So it's not as if I'm looking at someone who does this and say, you're just so wrong, you're just off, you just want your way. No, there are legitimate reasons as to why people make this mistake, but it remains a mistake. And it's one that you have the power to change. You have the power to change your mindset when it comes to talking to people.
Very good. Thank you for that. Hope that helps you out and as you think through that in your life and relationships.